Welcome everybody to Content Architecture Using Design Patterns. My name is Adam Duran, and I'm going to start off by telling you just a little bit about myself. That's me. I'm American, but I live in Brussels, Belgium. A long time ago, I studied music and opera at Cornell University. I've been making websites, doing everything from design to database schemas, everything pretty much since 1998. I'm a senior front-end developer at 1X Internet. And one thing you probably did not know about me is a few years ago, I earned a black belt in Kung Fu. And those are my email and Twitter handle, Adam Duran Tenor. And let's go ahead and get started. First, a little bit about 1X Internet. We are a full-service digital agency and a leader in Drupal solutions. Most of our solutions are, in fact, Drupal. That's why we're here, but we do just about everything: design systems, React development, strategy, marketing, hosting, and maintenance. And we are both an excellent team, but also an international team. We have offices all over Europe, as far south as Cunil, Spain, up in Reykjavik, and our headquarters are in Frankfurt. So, as I said in my abstract for the session, creating a solid content architecture in Drupal is difficult because there are so many possible ways to model your content. Maybe you're here because you felt like that before. You felt like this: content types, fields, taxonomies. Like, how is the developer experience? What's it like for you, the editors? It's overwhelming. There are too many options. So we're here to try to create some organization, and maybe together we can find a few answers, because there's no ultimate answer. This is 42. Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy reference for you fellow Douglas Adams fans out there. Anyway, moving along. Let's get started. So I'm going to quickly go through the two principal parts of the title of the session: content architecture using design patterns. So what is content architecture, excuse me, and what are design patterns? And we're going to go through each of those in turn, and then we're going to talk about how to use them, how they influence each other, and their complex relationships. So this was a great quote I found. Content architecture is a holistic approach to organizing content systems, which considers not only content, but also people, processes, and technology. So our technology in this case is Drupal. So let's take a closer look at what makes up the other three: the content, the people, and the processes. So the content, what is the content that is getting input? Well, lots of types. You have your content types. Could be pages or news articles, paragraphs, accordions or carousels or calls to action. Custom entities. These are usually associated content, but they don't need their own specific routing, or they don't need specific, they don't need to function exactly like, they're, how do I say this? They get attached to other entities. This might be the address of a company or a contact person. You can have custom blocks, which are very common: menus or breadcrumbs, or your copyright in the footer, taxonomies, categories or tags, and your different types of media. These are all different types of content that you put in through the admin UI. I think that's where, but we're gonna have to figure out how it's going to get organized. We'll get to that. So, and who is inputting the content? Well, that's you all. That's largely whoever is watching the session. It could be editors, managers, site builders, site owners, but it's probably, possibly, and probably you. How does the content go in? Lots of different ways. Well, there's really two different ways. It's either gets migrated in, or someone's entering it. It's entities and entities. It's paragraphs and content types, and you're uploading the media files and attaching your custom entities and more paragraphs and paragraphs inside of paragraphs. It goes on forever. And now we're going to talk to the part which I'm mostly involved with. How does content get output? Because you can come out as paragraph types, as a hero image or carousel. You have stuff coming out of your CK editor as text, your calls to action. So many, like, what are all the design patterns, the patterns you're used to seeing visually? They can be anything, right? You think about, you also have your menus and your mobile menu and what's going to come out on the footer and your sharing links. Like, this is all stuff that has to go in and it all has to come out. But one thing you see more and more often, and in so many different types and varieties and flavors, there's these cards and teasers. And it might be a vertical teaser or horizontal teaser with a picture on the left and the picture on the right. And maybe it has a date and maybe it has a blurb and there's a button or a link, maybe probably a title. Is the whole thing linked? Is part of it linked? It goes on. Also, like entities, it's really so many possibilities. And this is what's so confusing. There's so many ways to get data in. There are so many ways to get data out. And how are we really going to make sense of this all? So let's talk more about when we're getting the data out. Design patterns. So according to Wikipedia, a design pattern is a reusable form of a solution to a design problem. Okay, trying to relay some information from your website to the user, probably to have them take an action in line with your business goals. So here's a couple of great quotes. On the web, we think of patterns as reusable interface components. This is a quote by Ethan Marcotte, who is the originator of the concept of responsive design. And yeah, so we're going to take a look at these patterns as reusable. That's such reusability is such a key tenet of web design. And here's another great quote by Brad Frost, who is the creator of Pattern Lab. Pattern Lab is a tool we front-enders use to prototype and organize our patterns, and then can also actually be used to output them. We'll see that later. But here's the quote: "Atomic design is not a linear process, but rather a mental model to help us think of our user interfaces as both a cohesive whole and a collection of parts at the same time." Now, atomic design is one way to organize our design patterns, and it helps us keep them organized hierarchically, and you can see how they live as individuals and also how they function in a larger ecosystem. So let's go over in a little more detail some of the principles of atomic design. So, as Brad Frost said, it's a methodology for creating design systems. And you can see over here, we go from protons to atoms to molecules to organisms. It takes its cue from biology and chemistry, and then it goes off into its own tangent, templates, and pages. So how does this relate to what we are talking about in design patterns? Well, let's have a look. Aha, here's some atoms. We have an image atom, here's a title atom, here's a button atom, and together they come together. And now we have a card molecule. And some of how we're putting these atoms together into molecules and molecules into organisms, etc., there are some principles that we have to keep hold of, and because they help us keep the components and design patterns reusable and encapsulated, and because these are just generally good principles of software design, and under the hood, this is all software. Also, but it also applies to just the design process in general. So these principles, I'm going to go over 3 of them. Keep it super simple. There's another way to say it, but I thought this way was a little more polite. The idea here is, when possible, you want fewer content types, fewer design patterns, fewer view modes. If you get too complicated and too many variations, the complexity grows exponentially, and it makes it difficult to make editorial decisions like, do I want this teaser or that teaser? But it makes your projects quickly more expensive, and we don't want that. Keep dry. Dry stands for don't repeat yourself. Every pattern should be represented once. Every visual pattern should be represented once. As we're going to see, there are sometimes different ways to get different types of content into the same pattern. And that is ideal, because if you have 3 sets of code that all look the same way to the user, then when you have to like change a color, you've got to change it in 3 different places. And we don't want that. Every piece of code should be represented only once. And lastly, I'm kind of partial to this one. This is the Pareto principle, also known as the 80-20 rule. Probably have all heard of this, but just to read some little bit, the relationship of myself to this Pareto principle is that it was my grandfather, who was a management consultant, Joseph Juran, and he developed this concept of the 80-20 rule. And so I'm a little proud there. In computer science, where it's relevant to us, Microsoft, for example, noticed that fixing the top 20% of the most reported bugs fixed 80% of the related errors. Someone else, a famous computer scientist, said, his name was Lowell Arthur, he said 20% of the code has 80% of the errors. So you could also say that 80% of your website could be written in 20% of the allocated time, or the hardest 20% of the code takes 80% of the time. And the point here is, more complexity causes like that 20% extra you want is going to take 80% of your project time. And so you want to, again, keep it super simple. This is so just as you think of your own projects and your own websites, begin to consider where things got the scope got a little out of control, and where maybe there are opportunities to begin to look for opportunities to scale things back. So now we're going to talk about patterns. We take this little mock-up right here. What are some patterns you see? Now I want you, in a normal session, I'd ask people to shout them out rather than use a poll, because I think that's confusing in this particular case. Oh, I do have a poll though. Jofi, should we do the poll now as like a little?
Already on.
Oh, it's already on. Great. Okay, we'll read the results closer to the end. Cool. Anyway, so here, take a piece of paper or in a somewhere on a Google Doc or whatever. Take a minute, and I want you to write down the patterns you see, individual patterns. Give you guys like 30 seconds. Ten more seconds. You weren't expecting a pop quiz, were you? All righty. So you guys can compare your list to mine. We have layout. That's its own pattern. It's just the header layout. It's what causes this to stay to the left and this to stay to the right. That's one pattern, the layout. The logo is a pattern. Maybe it's got a link on it. Here's our primary menu. You could even say, I didn't highlight them, but you could even say the links are their own pattern. Could be, and here's an active link. So it's a variant of the basic link. We have our hero image. Almost looks like Tatooine, except there's only one sun. We have a text block, maybe from CK Editor. Section title. We have a grid. And in the grid is 3 cards, 2 and 3. And we have 2 different types of cards, one with an image and a title, one with no image, title, date, and a button. So maybe these don't link, and maybe the whole card is linked. Who knows? Anyway, hope you guys did well on the little quiz. But it's important to, when we look at designs, to begin to see what the patterns are and which ones are reusable. We're going to focus on cards because, as I mentioned earlier, cards are ubiquitous. Cards are everywhere. And there's not just cards, teasers, tiles, it doesn't matter. Anything you plop into a grid. And there's so many types of them. And when you have, sometimes you'll get a design where there's these smaller variations, either visually, which have implications for both the editorial experience and for the back end. But sometimes we can get the different sources from the back end all output into the same pattern. And we're going to look at both of these actually in the opposite order. So let's go to that. So here, we're going to start with some examples. This is a grid from our 1x Internet demo site. This is a grid with 3 cards, right? They kind of look the same, right? Image, 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 title, 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 text. Oh, got a date and some sort of tag. Okay. And then here's our body text, and they both have these links at the bottom. All right, so this is different over here, but aside from that, they all look the same. Cool. Moving on. Here is another set of cards, but these cards are not all the same. We're going to take a look at some of these different cards, specifically, sorry, I'm just going to go back. We're going to look at this one and this one and this one. And they all come out looking pretty much the same, right? Image, and you got some padding here, title, some text, link. The other one had the date. But we're going to look like, we're going to pretend we're front-end developers, and we're going to look at the source, assuming we have Twig debug turned on, and we're going to look at the Twig debug code. So this is for this one, this card over here. This, we can tell from this Twig debug code which template Drupal is going to use to render that. Okay, so here there are 4 possible templates, and this X, and the fact that I made it bold, denotes which template is being used. And we can learn a lot from the title of the template: node, page, teaser. So this is content type, page, and view mode, teaser. We're going to talk a little more about what view mode really means in a second. Okay, so node page teaser.html.twig. Well, let's go look at what that looks like, what that template actually looks like. Okay, so this might look like gobbledygook to you all. Let's talk about what's happening here. This is Twig code, and it's saying we're going to look for this pattern called card link, in Pattern Lab. And the reason it's called card link is because the entire card is linked. Sometimes you have just a title or just the image linked or just the button. In our cards in 1x Internet, very often people expect the entire card to be linked. So that's what this pattern does. And it has these fields we're passing to it. So this is a little technical and maybe a little bit in the weeds, but just so you all understand, there's a reason why this is all important as we compare everything. So card has image. This is just whether or not this is populated. If it's empty, then, or if it's not empty, this is true. So card image has true, or it doesn't. The text, this is the body text coming from this field. URL, our link text, card, and label. For nodes, or really entities in Drupal, when you pat in the template, you get this and you get this. You don't have to do anything special to get access to the URL or the title. And then here's our twig block with the image. Okay, so we're going to come back to some more of this markup, twig markup, in a second for the other two, and they're going to be a little bit different, and we're going to look for those differences. Okay, so first, here is the next card. This was the one with the date and the category. And we can see, oh, this twig debug tells us this was, now we know why it's different. It's from the news content type. It's still a teaser view mode, but this is the news content type. Aha, so that's a little bit different. Well, let's go take a look at that under the hood. Okay, so some similarities here, still using the card link pattern from Pattern Lab, same component. Same, this is the same. Huh? Aha, of course, we have to pass in this value for metadata, and it was put together up here in the template, not that important how, but it's what contains the date and the category. And we're passing it so that we can assume card link conditionally renders metadata when it's populated. So when it's not there, it's missing here. And when it's populated, it renders. But we use the same component, same design pattern. That's super, that's efficient. That's not repeating yourself. All right, let's go to that third card and this is a lot less twig debug code and there's no suggestions. Oh, there's just this one right here, right? This teaser entity.html.twig. Well, that's because this card comes from a custom entity and not a node. A custom entity and with no view mode, but the default view mode. So we don't get the template suggestions. We're just told which templates to use. And we're going to look at that template. And well, this looks mostly the same, right? Still got card link, cool. And oh, this is interesting. The field name for the image is different. Okay, and if you don't believe me, we can go back really quick. Field preview image. This is developer choice. Okay, fine, but it's different. But it's not a node. This is just when they created this entity, they added fields. They decided to call it field image. Fine. Card URL is not just plain URL. It's got this whole other thing. Because again, it's not a node. It doesn't have any native routing. It doesn't have, so we have to add specifically a link field. Additionally, we have to add specifically a title field because it doesn't get that label variable. Other than that, it's the same, still using the same pattern. Again, efficiency and not repeating ourselves. So let's take a quick look at the actual card link template. It is very truncated because it's not, the exact markup is not that important. what's important is that we had 3 different Drupal templates, 2 different content type teasers, and the custom entity teaser, and all 3 have the same design pattern and got rendered through this same template. Now here's a total different 3 set of cards. And this is just to demonstrate even more variety as possible. You can have a full image, you can have a half image, or no image. And you can have different color schemes. This button's red, this one's green. You can have the types of content. This has a list, this has, but they're still cards. They're still, what do they have in common? The style and placement of this category or descriptor is there. The placement of the button and the style of the button, that's the same. The titles, even though they're in different places and positioned differently, the style is identical. So you can create as much variety within your cards as you want, but there is gonna be a cost, and we're going to talk about that cost for both you and your developers in a minute. But the point is here that I'm trying to drive home is you can have same pattern with many variations. You can have a single design pattern that can be the visual source of truth for several different types of content. It's just like with these gummy bears. No matter what color or flavor you inject into them, they're still going to be shaped like bears. All right, moving on. So we've seen how multiple entities can be channeled into a single pattern. Now we're going to see how a single piece of content can be directed into multiple patterns. And I'm doing a time check. I have 18 minutes, so I better not talk too slow. All right, moving on. So here we have 2 card type teasers. They're fairly similar. The one on the left has some padding. You see this little padding around the content, right? It has a body text and this one doesn't. And here, as you can see, well, this has, there's no real padding. There's no padding left, right. It's in line, it's flush, right? So that's very much a distinction. This has spacing around the content. This doesn't, okay? Here, all this is white background. This doesn't have a change in background. And this one has, over here on the right, has no body text. So they're different patterns, but what's interesting to notice, okay, they're sufficiently similar that they could even be coded into the same component. Your front ender would just need a simple condition to know when to render one or the other. And my point here is, no matter how visually similar or visually different cards get, you still need some way, the component has to know the pattern. How do you say it? You have to have some way that you're passing the information of which pattern to use. And there's really a million ways to do this in Drupal. But I believe that the most optimal way is the way I'm going to show you now. So we're going to talk about view modes. What is a view mode? By view mode, I mean what gets configured for a given content type under the Manage Display tab. Here's the default. Here's our highlight for highlighting input for search results. And here's our teaser. News, teaser. And I think if you recall, as I demonstrated earlier, each of these will get, every one of these will get its own template. So this will get node -- news -- teaser, right? And here it is. This was our node -- news -- teaser, right? So now we know the file name really starts to make sense. And here I've put in, it's a different card, but this is the one that we're talking about. This is our normal teaser, let's say. So now, what if we wanted to have a way, the best way to output that other one is to have another view mode. This one we're calling special teaser, and it's going to get a template with this name, Node News Special Teaser. You can see it's still the card link, and this is it. This is the key. Card variant. We are going to pass this into the pattern. Doesn't matter, it doesn't have to be special. This is just what I made up. But by passing in this parameter, now card link can say, oh, well, if you're this parameter, I can style you like this. That's how it knows. And so so to get just a different type of teaser visually, whether it's a similar one like this is to the other one or incredibly different, you need a new view mode. Now, these view modes are configurable here. This is the one for, actually, this is the one for the custom entity. This is a little bit different. No, sorry, this is, I should just read this. This is paragraph. This is our page reference. So this would have been that page teaser in that first set we looked at. Here's its paragraph managed display rendered as teaser. And the next one, here's a view. We have the recent content. This we also showed way earlier. And in your view, you can choose the format that you want the notes to come out as. And we can choose teaser or special teaser. So whether these view modes that you add, they can get exposed in the admin UI either here or here. And you could even, in a paragraph, it could show up as a paragraph field. It could get exposed if you had a very good developer. And that is, so the whole point I'm trying to make is that what the patterns are, what the designs look like, can help inform how the content goes in. And this Karen McGrain, who has written some books with Ethan Marcotte, who I mentioned earlier, pattern libraries can inform not just the front-end styles on the website, but actually inform the way that the content creators, you, and the owners of the site, you, manage and maintain the substance of the website. They really, knowing how the content comes out helps you plan how you're putting it in. And that's because designers and developers, we need to be part of the process in content architecture. We need the designers to give visual variety, but without excess. And we need the developers to implement, but also to ask, could there be a simpler way to do this? Could there have less variety for the sake of not getting into that whole 80-20 thing and spiraling into like millions of patterns and view modes and just becoming unmanageable? And then even a content editor will be like, well, I don't know which one I'm supposed to use. It gets very hard to manage after a while, because every variation that is represented visually in the design must also be represented somewhere in code or configuration. So this is the thing. Content architecture is a team effort. And this is my advice to you all. Come together in your teams. And I mean everybody. The strategist, the information architect, the project manager, the designers, the front-end developers, the back-end developers. Discuss the content model and the designs. Reconcile differences. Consider the technical consequences of too many design variants or a complicated content model. And to do this before any code is written. It takes time, but not nearly as much as having to rebuild or redesign something mid-project. Thank you. That, I think, is the end of the session. And now I think I'm opening up for questions. Jofi?
Yes, we have one. What do you suggest as a component library or component management? Right now, we are using KSS for that purpose.
So I don't have any experience with KSS. I have a lot of experience with Pattern Lab. I used to do sessions on Pattern Lab integration with Drupal. Pattern Lab is a great tool. It's what's nice about it is that it can use the Twig templating language, and Drupal uses the Twig templating language. So it seemed like a natural fit. If what you're doing is only Drupal, that is probably the best way to go. However, if you are dealing with like true design systems where your patterns have to be consumed by not just Drupal. For example, you have also a React app and also like some sort of decoupled front end for a online shop, and that's written in, I don't know, Vue. Then Pattern Lab doesn't do it. Pattern Lab gives you Twig and nothing else. Storybook is probably a better choice for that. We started doing some stuff in web components, which can get consumed by Drupal, by Vue, by React. So it just depends on what sort of larger like ecosystem you're trying to support.
The next one is from Nicola. In your examples, you have used template suggestions with the content type inside. Is this the best practice you would recommend, or is it better to start with a more generic suggestion without the content type in it, and then adjust things only when specificities occur? For example, is it better to fix a pattern to a given view mode?
Oh, that is a great question. So, that is a great question. So when you leave things generic and then make them specific later, it's not unlike what we front-enders do with CSS, where we used to do, where you let things cascade down. Like you set your font color and it affects everything except, oh, here's my links and I want my links to be red, not blue. But it's really that's fine if you have a simple site. But if you start having 3, 4, 5 content types and more than 2 view modes, no one remembers which is the default and which is the exception. And yes, Twig debug can tell you, but trust me, it can get complicated fast. I believe what I think is a better best practice is to, okay, sorry, let me, as a caveat, I deleted a few of the actual Twig debug, the template suggestions, which were either node ID specific or some other specific, because it is possible to get too specific. I think that it's easier, especially when you're using a tool like Pattern Lab or any kind of pattern library. It's easier on a per content type, per view mode basis to tell it, use this pattern. And that's just enough specificity to not have a million templates and to catch enough under one umbrella, to catch enough in one basket to send to one pattern. And then have fallbacks. For example, let's say you have a node type, you're building a site and you have a node type, you're gonna get its own landing page template later, but you haven't gotten there yet. So maybe you leave the default one to just still output the fields and give them a little space between each one so that your out of the box node doesn't look horrible to whoever happens to come look at it. Does that answer the question?
Hopefully.
Hopefully. It's hard, like, again, virtual, it's hard to get the feedback. Another question.
Mark is asking, one issue I have here is the use of so many entity type templates, such as node, news, teaser, HTML twig, and node, event, teaser, HTML twig, etc. I'd much prefer just node, teaser, HTML twig, and put some if statements in it instead. I hope it was clear the way I
yeah, that also works. It depends on the if statements. As long as you're not really mucking around too much with the data, there can be, not that this will happen, the caching issues that if you start doing too much, if you're just doing logic to say, if this, show this, and if not that, show that, that's fine. I also think that if my pattern lab templates have too many if this, then else, that, or I have trouble keeping track of, I feel like those patterns can also get too complicated. This way, each pattern, whether it's the each template, whether it's the Drupal template or the pattern lab template, they have like, I don't know, they don't usually have more than, 100 lines. And sometimes I've seen card templates that have more than 100 lines of code, and I stop knowing what I'm looking at after a while. So it's a personal choice. I think using just no teaser works. But I do think there could theoretically come a point where you would get too much complexity and you would want to break it up into different ones. That's almost a matter of personal preference.
Seems like you have no more questions and 3 minutes left.
Okay.
Do you want to announce the poll results?
Yes, announce the poll results.
Okay, so we have...
Actually, there are a few more. Actually, before I have 3 minutes, I need to do this.
Okay.
Before the poll results. So please join us for contribution opportunities on Friday. There's a mentored contribution sprint, a first-time contributor workshop, and the general contribution. You can find out more with the hashtag Drupal contributions. 2 more sessions today on editorial experience by my colleagues. Enterprise grade editorial experience with Drupal by Christoph Breitert at 1:30. And then there's a workshop, your first steps to a successful content strategy by Badi Sonia Breitert. God, I'm speaking too fast. Badi Sonia Breitert. I'm going to pop in, I think, there and answer some questions about similarly stuff that I talked about today. And that's at 4:15 this afternoon. And we at 1x Internet are hiring. Please, if you're interested, we're hiring all types of positions. Send your resume over to jobs@onexinternet.de. We've done questions, and please don't forget to do the survey. And we still have 3 minutes, so let's do the poll results, please.
So the poll was about what people love most about the virtual DrupalCon, and with 26%, unlimited coffee breaks is number 1. Then with 21%, no travel costs. The third is with 18%, I can watch the Dries note from my couch. And I can work at the same time, and no line for the bathroom are the bottom of the list with 70%.
All right. Wow, it's still fairly close. That's still fairly close across the board. Cool. Well, then we'll finish 2 minutes early. I want to say I wish I had some sense of like feeling the room. It's hard doing this, like not knowing who else is out there and seeing your faces. But thank you all for coming. I hope you learned something. I learned a ton putting this together. So thank you all for your time, and I wish you all a great DrupalCon.